Hello again and welcome to Catholic Social Teaching 101. I'm Jim Grant, the Director of Social Justice Ministry for the Diocese of Fresno, and it's my privilege once again to have a panel that will help unpack the second principle of Catholic social thought, which is the family, community, participation. We're going to begin today with family, and that will be based around the Pope's apostolic exhortation, The Joy of Love. Our panel includes Monsignor Dreiling, who is the Vicar General and moderator of the Curia for the Diocese of Fresno. We also have Sister Kathleen Dreiling, who is a Sister of Notre Dame and is also the Director of Religious Ed for the beautiful parish of St. Paul Catholic Newman Center here in Fresno. And to my immediate right is my good friend Deacon Supino, who is the Parish Life Coordinator for our parish, St. Paul Catholic Newman Center. Without further ado, Monsignor, would you want to start us off with a pastoral approach to this wonderful exhortation? What would be one point that we need to have on the table if we had one thought? What might that be?
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to share some thoughts regarding, particularly from the pastoral point of view, being a priest now for over 40 years. It's been kind of a hit and miss when it comes to marriage and how we might handle marriage in parish settings. What this particular exhortation gives us is almost a kind of a blueprint that can help us, pastors, pastoral associates, people in pastoral ministry within the diocese, to be able to find ways in which, from the point of view of our Holy Father, how we might walk with, and the word that comes to my mind is a word that the Holy Father uses a lot, is accompany, is to use that sense of accompaniment of our people throughout their journey leading up to living out married life in the church, keeping in mind that marriage, family, is the kernel, the seed of parish life, and then therefore the whole church's life. If we have strong families, we have strong church.
Sister Kathleen, you and Deacon John are working on a beautiful project up at our parish. What is one thing you might like to share that is really impressing you after two of those evenings with our parishioners?
Jim, when I first read this document, I was shocked at the simplicity but the depth of the language. And it followed 2 years of study and coming together in dialogue. And so I first read it and I went to Deacon John and I said, we have to start the conversation on a local level. And so it took us about 6 months or so to kind of figure out how to do that. But what I was really impressed with in the document, it was about meeting people where they are, and that's where we see them in our parishes, and learning about the complexities of their lives, and then also taking them where they are, but helping them to inform their conscience and then trust it.
Deacon John, you and I are the two on this panel who can speak about a marriage relationship with our spouses, with having raised families. You as deacon and as parish life coordinator, what is it that you're seeing with Kathleen with these gathering of our parishioners?
I think one of the things that sticks out is there's definitely been a lack of intimacy, to use a word that Pope Francis uses a lot, in the relationship between church and family. And I think for the first time, we're seeing people basically expose themselves in some of the intimate things that they feel have been burdening them for many years. And we're finding some awfully, how should I say, truthful things coming out, from our folks. And so I find it very, very, very refreshing and hopeful. I think that's the big thing, hopeful, because although, as I was speaking to Monsignor earlier, sure, they've been upset over the years about various teachings, but now I see that they see hope. They see something happening positive in the future. And what Sister Kathleen spoke to, that whole idea of conscience, I think to me, that may be the crux of this whole exhortation.
I was going to show a clip, but I'm going to hold off because I really want to hear one more time from Monsignor, who introduced me today to what is a fantastic summary in about 3 full pages. Do you want to tell us about that deacon's essay and why it impressed you so much that he could summarize such a dense document on 3 pages, Monsignor?
It is. It's a remarkable thing. The deacon is Deacon Bill Ditewig, who is a former head of the deacon office for the Catholic Bishops' Conference in the United States, and to our benefit is right next door in the Diocese of Monterey. So we've had some contact. But I discovered this overview, as it's called, as a real source of getting to the very basic of what the exhortation is trying to say. Pope Francis, immediately at the opening of this exhortation, he admits that this letter or this exhortation is lengthy. It's long. And it's like, 265 pages long, something like that. So for most people, it will be a difficult letter to read, not necessarily in its complexity, but in its length. And so what Deacon Ditewig does is to kind of bring it down into a readable, into a format that people can very, very easily understand. And he focuses on a couple of main points. One of them being, and I'll just go through one of them, and that is time is greater than space. And when you think about that, what does that mean? Well, the Pope unwraps that idea in his letter, and Deacon Ditewig does a good job of doing that, in the sense that, the things that are expressed in this letter are going to take time for us to digest, to be able to understand, so that it may have formative value in the lives of our people. Too many times we live in a world that says, I want instant answers to my complex questions. The Pope is saying, wait a minute, let's hold off just a second. Let's take some time, and he really encourages communities like the Newman Center in Fresno to really open up, to unpack the letter over time. And it will really have a deeper effect on people's lives than a quick flash in the pan kind of overview. And so what Deacon Ditewig does is take one of those very important teachings of the Holy Father, that anything, not just this issue, but any issue dealing with theology or morals or whatever, is that we need time to think things through. And not just go through it. And so he says, give this letter, the Pope does, give this letter time to read and to let it sink in.
John, I wanted to comment on that because it's one of the first issues that Sister Kathleen and I spoke of. We decided to put this 6-week session together. But looking at each other, there's no way that we can cover this in 6 weeks, and there's no reason why we would try to, but we see this as an ongoing process that once we finish the 6 weeks, once people just get to the surface of things, they will begin to get into deep discussions. And one of my fervent wishes is that we can develop communities who would get together, maybe in people's homes, and begin discussing this and talking about it and giving it some air. We need to air out some of these comments and
Deacon asked me to make an announcement a couple weeks before we were starting this, so that we could sell some of the books and to prepare. And so in the announcement, when you're up in front of everyone, you really get a chance to see the faces. And at one point I suggested that even if they couldn't come to the 6 sessions, maybe they wanted as a couple to take this and take it home and read it together and unpack it and come back to a session later on. Because we said, this is not the end of this. We will do this again and again and again and let it, as you said, seep in, and then we unpack it. Actually could see people with tears coming up from, and wanting to do that, and talking about the complexities of family. And we have, pain and sorrow and joys, and we come together to share. And we have a faith family that can help us unpack all of that. And they're responding. So.
And that was one of the things I noticed last night. We had a reflection question was set out for them, and I was making the rounds of the different tables, and there were tears in the eyes, especially of one person who was dealing with a problem that she'd been dealing with for years.
Wow.
And so it came to the forefront, and I think this is what we need to do is to air this out, and it was just a rewarding experience.
Yeah, I'm thinking as a pastor, of those couples or those families that have over the years been suffering in silence, most of all in silence. Some have spoken out, but over the years of my experience, it's been in silence. And to hear you say that there were people with tears in their eyes, I can hear the comment now. I haven't been present at your sessions, but I could hear the comment now saying, why wasn't this done years ago? And the Holy Father is really offering us an opportunity. It's not by accident, in my opinion, that it's called joy. Joy. His encyclical Joy of the Gospel, and now Joy of Love. That's not by accident. And so what he's trying to help us to understand as the supreme teacher of the church is to say, our ministry, our mission is to bring joy, not to set up barriers, not to put in potholes that people have to fall in, but rather open up the gates, open up the bridges so that people can cross over in joy to understand the power of the gospel message.
I hate to tell you guys, but you've used up half the show already. I barely got to say anything. We'll take our 1-minute break. We'll be right back because this is exactly what could be going on in your local parish, around a coffee table in your home, and in any sort of small faith group. This is a document definitely worth sharing. We'll be back in 1 minute. Please stay tuned.
KNXT, the nation's only full-powered broadcast station, owned and operated by a Catholic diocese in the U.S., and streaming live on the internet at knxt.tv. Need your support to keep the message of the good news alive. Just go to knxt.tv, click on the Make a Financial Gift, go to Donate, and fill out your one-time or monthly offering under PayPal. It's just that easy. Your donation makes it possible for KNXT, Catholic Television, to continue its ministry by celebrating the Mass and proclaiming the gospel. Thank you from KNXT.
Welcome back to Catholic Social Teaching 101. We're in that program with the second theme of Catholic social thought, the importance of family, community, participation. We're talking about the document of His Holiness Pope Francis, the joy of love. What I'd like to do right now is introduce someone who couldn't be here today, but he tried to, but he couldn't, is Father Jim Martin, a very good friend of Stephen Colbert, but a good friend, a good friend. And Father Martin will have 5 of his colleagues at America Magazine give us what he calls 5 takeaways from Amoris Laetitia. Let's hear Father Jim and his colleagues share 5 major points of this groundbreaking document.
Pope Francis's groundbreaking new document, Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, ask the Church to meet people where they are, consider the complexities of people's lives, and respect people's consciences when it comes to moral decisions. The apostolic exhortation is mainly a document that reflects on and encourages families. But it is also the Pope's reminder that the Church should avoid simply judging people and imposing rules on them without considering their struggles. His goal is to help families, in fact everyone, experience God's love. All this may require what the Pope calls new pastoral methods. So let's look at the top 5 takeaways from Amoris Laetitia.
The Church needs to understand families and individuals in all their complexity. The Church needs to meet people where they are. So pastors should avoid judgments that don't take into account the complexity of various situations. In other words, one size does not fit all, and black and white thinking is not helpful. People are encouraged to live by the gospel, but they should also be welcomed into a church that appreciates their struggles and treats them with mercy. Overall, Pope Francis calls for an approach of accompaniment.
The role of conscience is paramount in decision-making. Individual conscience needs to be better incorporated into the Church's practice. In other words, the traditional belief that conscience is the final arbiter of the moral life needs to be recovered. The Church is supposed to form consciences, not to replace them, says the Pope. And while it is true a person's conscience needs to be formed by Church teaching, our conscience does much more than just follow rules. Conscience also recognizes with a certain moral security what God asks of us.
Divorced and remarried Catholics should be more fully integrated into the Church. Divorced and remarried people are not excommunicated. Rather, they are members of our Church. We can help them feel more welcome in the Church in a few pastoral ways, says the Pope. By looking at the specifics of their situation, by having priests counsel them privately in what's called an internal forum, and by respecting that the final decision about their level of participation in the Church is ultimately left to their conscience.
We should no longer talk about people living in sin. In a sentence reflecting a new approach, the Pope says, "It can no longer simply be said that those living in irregular situations are living in a state of mortal sin. Other members of non-traditional families, like single mothers, need to be offered understanding, comfort, and acceptance. When it comes to these people, the Church needs to stop applying moral laws as if, in the Pope's vivid words, they were stones to throw at a person's life."
Traditional teachings on marriage are affirmed, but the Church should not burden people with unrealistic expectations. As the Church has always taught, marriage is between one man and one woman. Marriage is indissoluble, and same-sex marriage is not considered. At the same time, the Church has often put upon people what Francis calls an artificial theological ideal of marriage that is removed from people's everyday lives. At times, these ideals have been a tremendous burden, and to that end, priests need to be better trained to understand the complexities of people's married lives.
Overall, Amoris Laetitia asks the Church to help families of every sort and people in every state of life. They need to know that even in their imperfections, they can be homes for God's love, as well as places where people will experience that love. The new apostolic exhortation offers a vision of a pastoral and merciful Church that welcomes and encourages families and all people to experience the joy of love.
Well, first of all, I want to thank America Magazine, which did give to KNXT a carte blanche on using all of their America media. And that is a wealth of fantastic resources, which I hope all of you will think of going to visit. We will be posting, along with this program, other resources that are being used at the Newman Center, resources that Monsignor suggested we read for this program, and other resources that all of us could do more study over and discussion with our friends, especially our own families. On that note, the 5 words that I think we want to talk about, but in an order beginning with complexity, conscience, the divorced and remarried, living in sin, and traditional Catholic teaching on married love. Let's begin with complexity. Did any of you 3 want to share what you found in reading or hearing from people, the appreciation that the Pope has for valuing the struggle and the complicated lives that Catholics live in the world today?
Well, when I read what Pope Francis says, I really relate to what he says about what Jesus experienced, that Jesus lived in a family, that he experienced the difficulties, and he understands us. And I think this is really a very heartwarming and again, hopeful thing, that he understands what the problem is. And now we have to work through these problems ourselves. He can't do it for us. We've got to do it ourselves. But now we have somebody, as Monsignor said, we have someone accompanying us on this journey. And every time I think, gee, this is the main point of this book, and then I find another main point, another. I know what I think is the main point, but I keep changing my mind. There's so much in here.
Now, we've been, in a sense, talking around the document, things that are people's reactions to it or how important it is. But maybe we should see a certain paragraph from it to appreciate this is the Pope, this isn't Father Martin. So, Greg, if you could put up paragraph 296, the first clip that I suggested, and here's what it is. It says this: "The Church's way from the time of the Council of Jerusalem has always been the way of Jesus, the way of mercy and reinstatement. The way of the Church is not to condemn anyone forever. It is to pour out the balm of God's mercy on all those who ask for it with a sincere heart. For true charity is always unmerited, unconditional, and gratuitous. Consequently, there is a need to avoid judgments which do not take into account the complexity of various situations, and to be attentive by necessity to how people experience distress because of their condition." Monsignor, I think you were alluding to this as a priest of 40 years, that there is a need for a new, and the Pope called it, we need to assess our own inability to deal with this, to deal pastorally with people's struggles.
And that's really, in my mind, where complexity comes from, is because I think it really is important that all of us need to remember that this document was the sourcing or the outcome of the two synods that were held on the family in Rome. And we all know, those of us who have been keeping a tab on, what went on in those two sessions of the synod, there was a lot of controversy regarding them. And even the bishops themselves had differing views. But I think it's really important that we don't just say, well, it's all too much for us to kind of drink in, but rather it's in the complexity, in the messiness of our life as Christians to work it out. And I go back to what the Pope said about, being patient, taking time, so that the Holy Spirit, and again, we're guided by the Holy Spirit, that allow the Holy Spirit to take root. And so this complexity is a beautiful image, but it's not for us to be afraid, but to kind of say, okay, we can work this out with the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
Anyone else on complexity on that first principle?
Well, I just would like to add, I was taught that we had to be perfect. And that we had to, and in reality, to not fail. And we had to store up all these perfections so that we could gain heaven. And this is just about, let's look at the complexity, because in the complexity are the joys and the sorrow and the suffering. That's where resurrection happens, is out of that. And we need this faith family, the church, to help us navigate through that. And that's what I experience with the people talking and sharing together is wonderful.
We see all those gray areas, which is really what we talk. It's very easy to say, well, black is black and white is white, and that's what we're going to adhere to. But once you hear the stories, there's so much stuff in the middle. And that's where we have to help these people to try to understand their problem.
The last line in what Olga shared on complexity, she said, overall, Pope Francis calls for an approach of an accompaniment. And independently, you've raised that point. But I want to remind you it was in 7 different paragraphs that he harkens back to this need for the church to accompany us on our journey. It's like a challenge to pastoral ministry to now see itself in an accompaniment mode.
Right.
It's a shift in gear.
It is. It is.
whole different way of looking at what pastoral ministry is all about. Used to be, in the time when I was growing up as a kid, it was go ask Father and he'll tell you the answer, okay? Not that those days are over exclusively, but it's now, let's talk about it and see what we can come up with, not in the sense of watering down the teaching of the Church, because that's very clear in this document that the Pope is not suggesting throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but rather he's asking us to think, to use the gifts that God has given us, all of us, to work out how it is that we do the will of God in the world in which we live. It's and I wrote down here on my notes that in one paragraph he says, the Pope says, and it's in 270, paragraph 270, whenever we do so, in other words, whenever we try to work this out, our lives become wonderfully complicated. You know, and that word complicated just rang, and I changed the word complicated. I'm not trying to tell the Pope what to say, but the word that came to my mind was messy. It becomes messy. And that's, I think, what some people are afraid of, is that they want black and white answers to very complicated problems or issues. And the Pope is saying it's okay to work this out, to maybe trip over ourselves a couple of times, but to work it out so that we can really be of service to the gospel, not just be making pronouncements from on high.
They're telling me I've got 30 seconds, and that's really distressing, because we will be back, though, with another program picking up where we left off today. But I do want to mention that not only did he say complicated, but I loved how we put the adjective wonderfully complicated. That is really awesome, to show that it's meant to be something of joy, that it's a wonderful, complicated life we have here. Not an easy life, but a wonderful life. On that note, we'll be back next week. Till then, God bless.